Hello, and welcome to another episode of Let's Argue About Plants, the podcast for people who love plants.
But not always the same ones. I'm Carol Collins. I'm associate editor at Fine Gardening Magazine.
Hey, everybody, I'm Danielle Sherry. I'm the executive editor here at FG. And I don't know if you guys like best of episodes, but Carol and I certainly do, because it allows us to go back into the archives and really check out some of our older episodes. And it's really fun to take a trip down memory lane, isn't it, Carol?
It absolutely is. And I love talking virtually to our listeners. It's really fun to hear your voices, guys. Like, keep the letters coming.
100%. So that's just a little preview. This episode, we're going to do best of our listeners' questions and our maybe best answers. I don't know. Carol and I do the best we can to answer those questions. And sometimes we reach out to, experts who might be a little bit more knowledgeable on the questions that you send in. I wanted to just put a plug in here, Carol, because as we were going through here and before we get into the best of listener questions episode, we recently launched our forums, which are on finegardening.com. You have to be a member of finegardening.com. Don't worry, guys, this is not an ad, but we call it the Gardening Answers Forums. And how these are set up is that for each region throughout North America, you can pop into these forums and we have experts that are fielding these questions that you put in there 24/7. Well, maybe not 24/7, but on a daily basis. So, recently, I've got garlic coming up in the snow. So I pinged our Northeast forum moderator and expert and said, I think I know the answer to this, but is my garlic going to die? And it's just so great to have experts. This is not Facebook, guys, where, every Joe Schmo is weighing in, but experts that are answering your regional backyard gardening questions. And I'm utilizing it like an average Joe because
Yes.
I need answers.
And what's cool is that you don't just have to look at your own region. I spend a lot of time looking in to see what the Southeastern people are talking about, and Southwest and Northwest. And there are a lot of questions and a lot of answers. And I think you can look at the Gardening Answers tab and sort of see a compilation of some of the top and more recent questions too. So if you want to browse that way, that's another way to engage.
Absolutely. And here's the thing. You don't have to be a member immediately just to see what's going on in there. So go to finegardening.com, click on the forum tab, and you can see the sorts of things that are happening in the Gardening Answers forums. And maybe that will encourage you to say like, hey, this is worth it. I'm going to plop down a few dollars a month to get all of my gardening questions answered by an expert. Come on now. All right. Well, without further ado, let's launch into our listener questions, our best of listener questions, and maybe the best of answers that Carol and I could come up with in the past couple of years. All right, Carol, who did you pick out of the spreadsheet first?
I picked one that was a question I was curious about. So this is from @momathome. Okay. And they asked, does the Miyawaki method for establishing a forest work? And I thought, okay, that's an interesting question. And how would you define work? But what I learned is that the Miyawaki method is not really a gardening technique as much as it is like an extensively researched approach to reforestation and ecological engineering. And so there's a lot of science behind it. And there are thousands of sites all over the world where this has been tried and is proving to be very effective. So Akira Miyawaki was a Japanese botanist. He began college at the end of World War II. You can imagine this in Japan. And he went to the graduate school at Hiroshima University. And he started in 1949, which if people know their history, that's like 4 years after the bomb was dropped over Hiroshima. So his interest was in weeds, things that grew back naturally in these devastated war-torn sites. And he wanted to figure out a way to bring their natural forests back because they were very deforested after this happened and, in general from the war.
Yeah.
So his basic premise is that a degraded site that has no trees and the soil has been depleted can be intensively planted with a carefully engineered mix of native plants. So he would put a mix of trees, shrubs, ground covering, herbs, perennials, and very close together, as close as like 3 feet together. And these plants would grow and form a community that's sort of competitive, it's dynamic. Not everything survived, but because the plants were so close together, they grew much more quickly than they would if they were sort of naturally reseeding themselves from birds. And, the other thing to compare it to is how the timber industry reforests, which is really focused on a few species that are valuable for timber, but
monocultures basically.
Right, and spaced so that they will grow pretty wood that you could cut down in, a certain number of years. This is not about that. This is about bringing a functional forest onto a site where nothing exists. So the very important first step is to get the soil to a place where it can support this kind of life. So the Miyawaki method always includes a big survey, a very intensive survey of the soil. You restore the soil. They said that, you want the topsoil depth to be 7 to 20 inches, depending on what you're growing. And then you plant, and you need to take care of the plants and make sure there are no invasive non-native species. And you tend it for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and then it takes care of itself. And they're finding, and this is happening in Asia, US, Europe, all over the world, and in tropical areas and temperate areas, they're seeing a functional forest regrowing within 20 to 30 years, where if nature took its course, it would take 200 or 300 years to accomplish the same amount of diversity. Yeah, so it does work, and it works wherever you are, as long as you put all of this, intensive research into it. And it's fascinating, right? This is not gardening, but it is gardening adjacent. I feel like gardeners could learn something from this. Like maybe 100%. You can plant things a little closer together if you want fast filling, if you want a taller canopy earlier, make things compete with each other. So fascinating stuff. I found a really good article put out by the University of Pennsylvania's Extension Service. And I will drop a link into the show notes for that, because they also have links that, if you really want to get into the science, they've got links to the research and fascinating stuff. And I just love to get a question about something that's new to me, but that's this interesting. Very cool.
Absolutely. And as you were talking, Carol, I think it is gardening adjacent. The other thing I think is that, yes, there's aspects now of gardening. Matrix gardening has taken off pretty considerably the last few years. Naturalistic gardening kind of is adjacent to that as well, where you are creating this intensive planting that you're planting closer together. You've got 3 to 4 different layers of plants in some matrices. In what Adam Woodruff, the designer who was out in the Midwest and now is on the East Coast, does, you have sometimes 7 different layers of plants, and you are intensively planting a space for fast filling ecological purposes. You're really trying to mimic what you naturally see in meadows, in forests, in, shade, woodland, stream bed areas, whatever the case may be of your situation. So, that's very cool. And the fact that it seems like a lot of that now, what's old is new, right? Might have come from original sparked in ideas from that. Wow, that's so fascinating. All right, we're good. We can end the episode now. Thank you for that question, and thank you for that awesome answer, Carol. Okay, so my first question was from Danielle. I swear I did not pick this question because she has my name, but it was via email, and it came in, and Danielle wanted to know, out of the ordinary hummingbird nectar plants. And that pulled on my heartstrings because it is hummingbird season here in the Northeast. I've been watching them just duke it out in my garden and get all curious and zoom around my head while we're eating dinner at night on the patio. So I picked two, and the first one is Cardinal Climber, and that's Ipomea solterii, and it's a hybrid. It's a cross. It's between two different vines. It gets a very very confusing Latin history. You'll see it all over the place, named differently on the internet, but this was a hand pollinated hybrid between red morning glory, which is Ipomea coquina, and cypress vine, which is Ipomea quamclit. Quamclit. I think I got that right. So it can vine up to 10 feet. It's an annual, so don't worry. This isn't something that's going to pull the siding off of your house or anything like that. You start the seeds indoors in the spring and you soak them overnight. Like most of the morning glory family, they need a little help. You can also take a little nail file and nick them a bit and then soak them. I find in my past with morning glories, that tends to help the effort of germination along a little bit even more. Then you can move these outside after the threat of frost is over. Obviously, getting up to 10 feet in a single season, it's going to need some sort of structure, a trellis, some sort of, tutor, something along those lines. This is not an aggressive vine, though. Like, I want to be very specific. This is not, a climbing hydrangea or something along those lines. It's just this very delicate climber with these really deeply cut, almost fern-like leaves, but it is not mimosa like the cypress vine, like one of its parents. It is not soft and fluffy. It's just very fern-like in its appearance. So it just gives you this really nice texture. But the real story is about these deep crimson red trumpet shaped blooms that will start when it's just a couple of feet tall. So starts in spring and goes all the way through to the hard frost. So you can imagine, trumpet shaped and red flowers. Yeah, obviously the hummingbirds go bananas over it. It's stunning. I love that it's well behaved. I love that it's a vine that's, kind of unusual. Like, not a ton of people know it. It isn't morning glory, and it looks markedly different than morning glory. And it's also not trumpet vine. It's not campsis. And everywhere I look online, people talk about, oh, hummingbird plant, campsis. Let me tell you, campsis might be a native, but it is real aggressive. And once you have campsis, you will never be rid of campsis. Trumpet vine is extremely aggressive. So I would recommend against planting that and try Cardinal Climber. It's really lovely. And my little seed starter down there, Carol, have you ever grown Cardinal Climber?
I have not. I don't have a lot of vines, and it's just like a blind spot for me. So I should try this one though. I'm afraid because like some of them are so aggressive. Like where is it going to go? What's it going to do?
Right. Is it going to reseed? Is it going to, yeah, no, none of those are a concern. It is hardy to zone 10, B, 11. So yeah, not a chance. And you know what, that is going to come back for us here in Connecticut and in most of the North America. All right. And then the second one that I wanted to give Danielle for an out of the ordinary hummingbird plant is, this is not an out of the ordinary plant, but I think it's out of the ordinary to think about it for a hummingbird. And that is early bird red white columbine. So, and that's Aquilegia and a whole bunch of letters. You don't have to worry about it. Just know early bird red and white columbine. And I started thinking about, wow, like columbine for hummingbirds. But of course, hummingbirds in a lot of areas of the country show up early, and there's not a whole lot for them generally to eat at that time. There is not a lot of nectar producing plants. So this is an extremely early series of columbines that sometimes will start blooming in some areas of the country as early as March. So you're providing that. And obviously, early bird, yes, it wakes up early. But I also thought, oh, that's so cool, because immediately this series was developed in order to provide nectar for the hummingbird. So I think that it's pretty awesome that they had that in mind, the plant breeders, when they developed this series of columbines. I picked red and white because obviously the red coloring tends to attract hummingbirds a little bit more. But honestly, hummingbirds will go to anything. It's more the shape of the plant and the concentration of the nectar within it. But I went with red and white. There's also a purple version as well, if that's more your cup of tea. Anyway, this particular one it has rose red flowers. They're kind of those spurred tubes that are clustered together. So if you can kind of picture, a tube with a little spur on the end of it. It has white center, so then that rosy red on the outside, so a cool bicolor going on. And holy cow, so well behaved. 18 inches tall by 18 inches wide. So just a lovely front of the border, early in spring, prolific bloomer. So starting in March, perhaps April, and going for a good month or so. So you're really providing a ton of sustenance for those hummingbirds. It likes shade to partial shade, moist, well-drained soil, and zones 3B to 9. So that's a pretty large swath too, because Danielle, I didn't know what zone you were in, so I wasn't exactly sure what kind of plant to recommend for you, but I thought both of those, an annual option that's a vine, and a really cool perennial that honestly, I've thought about columbines before, but not really as hummingbird attracting plants. So those were my two, and let me know if you grow them, Danielle. All right. Our next one is from, I'm just these Instagram handles can be tough, even email addresses, but this was Mr. Rico Bene. That's what I'm going to go with, asked us how to plan and plant a cottage garden. All right. So full disclosure, I do not have a cottage garden and I am not a garden designer. However, we have a lot of great resources on finegardening.com just because it's such a popular garden style. We've done several different articles. One of my favorites was an article a few years ago called A Cottage Garden That's Not Chaotic. And that was by David Kirshner and Scott Warren. I just loved that garden that was out in Cape Cod. It had these beautiful pastel flowers, this really frothy design, but they instilled some really nice bones in the garden and hardscaping in this really, really deliberate way that made it so this cottage garden was not, I don't know, so messy looking is the word for it. So that was a hard and firm design article that has some really great principles. So I'll drop that link in the show notes. We did another article by Valerie Strong, A Cottage Garden with a Twist, and one more by Marcia Tetrone, which was defining the new American cottage garden, which again was, how do I take kind of a more messy, frothy style and make it a little bit more manageable and legible? But here's your takeaways. All right, ready, Mr. Rico Bene? Lots of pastel hues repeated through the space. Now, that can come in the form of flowers, which it mostly is, or it can come in the form of foliage. I'm thinking like a dappled willow, for instance. Pale flowers and colors and hues. You're supposed to incorporate some topiaries or neat hedges in some way, shape, or form, boxwoods, Japanese ilex. Focus on flowers over foliage. So that's kind of the exact opposite of a lot of the design articles that we do, which say focus on foliage over flowers, but flowers. And then I loved this little takeaway, which was hardscape should be regionally appropriate. So yes, in New Mexico, you can have a cottage garden, but let's just talk about the hardscape that you end up having, these, fences and pathways and stuff. A split rail fence looks awesome in the American West. If you put that, in Maine, it might look a little funky. So white picket fences, Midwest and Northeast. So I loved that concept that I think came from Marcia Tetrone's article that, make that hardscape regionally appropriate. And the great thing about cottage gardens, I will say, is there's not a lot of hardscape. There's a few fences, maybe a little pathway, and that's about it. So those were just some, takeaway principles, but I would really recommend those 3 articles that we'll drop in the show notes to really go in depth if you are Mr. Rico Bene starting to plan a cottage garden.
That's excellent. I'm so inspired by the cottage garden look, but I feel like it might be too much work. Do you think that's a valid concern?
I had asked, I'm developing another article about roses, actually, with David Kirshner and Scott Warren. And I had posed that question to them, like, hey, I am never going to be able to do this. But part of it is that there's an incorporation of a lot of serendipitous plants, these self-sowers, foxgloves, of that nature. And, I believe it was David who had said to me eventually, it fills in so densely that really the only thing that's left to manage as far as maintenance is concerned is making sure your edges are clean. So I don't know if that holds true, because to me, I'm like, I look at all those flowers and go, holy cow, it's going to take me 8 months just to deadhead. But they kind of take a more laissez-faire approach to it. So I guess if you could do that, I don't know. I don't think it's for me. I love seeing them, but I don't think it's for me.
Fair enough.
All right. So I feel like we've been relying upon our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter folks' questions. So we did get an old-fashioned email in from Vicky. And I love this because, I'm kind of a fiend about pruning. I geek out on pruning articles. I love working on them. And this was a pruning question. So Vicky asked, pruning, are there any generalized rules regarding pruning shrubs? Like flowering shrubs can be pruned after blooming, or only in the spring, or only in the fall, and don't prune later in the fall, etc., etc. I find that I keep looking up individual shrubs, which can be so labor intensive, like the plethora of hydrangeas, for instance. So, all right, here's my answer, Vicky. Yes-ish. Yes-ish. Sort of, kind of. Here's a couple ones to live by, all right? Number 1, if it flowers on, it's not a plant type, it's not a season that you match up, it's whether it flowers on old wood or new wood. So if it flowers on old wood, you prune it immediately after flowering, as soon as it's done flowering. Sometimes even while it's flowering is fine. Now, what we're talking about with old wood, mophead hydrangeas, 9-barks, Weigelia, Deutzia, lilacs, these plants that basically, if in early spring, it looks like there's these swollen buds on these naked stems, that means it's going to bloom on old wood. Now, with that, many, not all, of these shrubs bloom in spring or early summer. So if you're trying to just, simplify your life a little bit, if it's a shrub that blooms in spring or early summer, that means don't touch that at any other time until after it blooms. And then, that mophead hydrangea that's kind of flopsy mopsy all over, then go through and clean it up and prune it at that time. So the flip side of that, right, is if it flowers on new wood, prune it in late winter or early spring. To be honest, or really anytime. I gotta be honest. I mean, if it flowers on new wood, you can really get in there anytime, but really late winter and early spring. So think panicle hydrangeas, butterfly bush, abelias, caryopteris, many of these new wood bloomers bloom in midsummer to fall. So that kind of gives you, just some ballpark. Now, are there several exceptions to every rule? Yes. So I know it's labor intensive, but a lot of times the best thing to do is to look up that individual shrub and just be sure. But, if you want to give your sanity, we were just talking about mental health. If you want to give your mental health a break and just go by those 2 rules, that's pretty standard advice that you can apply to almost all woody shrubs. The last thing I'm going to say is be careful with non-flowering evergreens. I'm talking to you, boxwood. I'm talking to you, Japanese hollies. You're supposed to prune those in the spring, but you need to do it after the threat of frost is passed, because we've all driven by these, boxwood hedges where somebody came in, pruned it. It pushed all this tender, soft, gorgeous growth. And then there's a frost or a dip in the temperatures and it all turns brown. So wait a little bit longer on those non-flowering broadleaf evergreens. And I think that pretty much covers it.
That
Yeah.
felt like that was like an article.
Okay.
That was amazing. Okay. I feel like I understand it better. Thank you for
I think we all need to simplify. So thank you, Vicki, for making us simplify this complicated gardening technique down to just give me the bullet points, people. All right, Carol, what's next on your mailbag list?
So I have a question that we actually got this question from a few different people, and they've asked for butterfly hosts that are not milkweed. And I get it. Like we hear day and night, oh, plant more milkweed. It's good for the monarchs. So there are other kinds of butterflies and moths, right? So, and there are a ton of great garden plants that you can plant that will be hosts for caterpillars. And it's good not only for the butterflies, but also for the birds that feed caterpillars to their babies. So I would say number one, the top one that I saw that supports Lepidoptera species is oak. That's just plain old Curces species and cultivars. And oak species in the United States support 468 species of butterflies and moths, which is considerable. And, I think the other thing to think about is that with a tree, the volume of habitat that you are creating is enormous. You've got a whole world for the chickadees to go hunting and the baby caterpillars to grow up. And we're gardeners, we're on the ground, we're looking at the ground all the time. Look up and think, what could I plant that would fill that space up there that would be good for the wildlife? And oak trees are one of those keystone species, and that's one of the reasons. Another good one that's just a fun plant to have in your garden is pussy willow. That's the native Salix discolor, which is found throughout the northern states and Canada. And that is a host for several butterfly species. And native willows in general are host to many different moths and butterflies. So no matter where you live in North America, you can probably find a native willow that'll support some Lepidopterae. Goldenrod solidago is great. 82 species from what I have found are supported by solidago. And so if you're growing these things and you have holes in the leaves, that's great. That's the desired result. Common blue violet, several species of fritillary depend completely on violets for their caterpillars as a food source for their caterpillars. So that's a great reason to let your lawn go in no-mow May. And also not to get so upset about, I don't understand how people get so upset about the violets in their lawn. It's like bonus garden, right?
Oh my gosh, I know. And it's so much prettier than turf grass is. I mean, come on. Kentucky bluegrass has nothing on a violet. Nothing.
Yes. Yeah. So just think of those pretty little blue violets as not only biodiversity, but caterpillar food. Golden Alexanders, that's a fun one that people often recommend. Zizia aurea, that's a host for black swallowtails, which also lay their eggs on parsley and dill. And there's always somebody in our local gardeners group every year, what is happening to my dill? And what is this terrifying looking insect on it?
Don't squish it.
I think they're cute. But anyway, that is the black swallowtail larvae, and they just will eat the heck out of your parsley and dill. And I say plant it for them and buy your dill from the store.
I love it. That's awesome.
A couple more: New Jersey tea, Ceanothus americanus. That's host to multiple butterfly and moth species. It also attracts small pollinators that the hummingbirds like to catch and feed to their babies. Hops, Humulus lupulus, supports multiple species, including the red admiral and the eastern comma, and evening primrose, which is, more of your western states. You'll have those Oenothera species, and that supports at least 22 moth and butterfly species. And don't forget your native grasses like big blue stem. That is also a larval host for many species. So the Xerces Society has regional plant lists that are downloadable, and I will drop a link to those in the show notes, and you can get ideas for wherever region that you're in. But just rest assured, there are tons and tons of things that are not milkweed that are great for butterflies.
Yeah, and it sounds like in a lot of native options that might already be growing in your area or around your garden or in your garden or in your lawn. So it's good to kind of have an eye on those. So maybe don't be so crazy about weeding, quote unquote, out every little thing that seems out of place, because it might be really important to the ecosystem, not just butterflies alone. All right. So let's see. Robin, my next one is from Robin the Gardener. And she asks, what are your favorite neat and tidy front yard plants? Plants that look decent in all seasons. That's what we all want, right? We all want plants that stay a nice, well-behaved side, that we don't have to prune constantly, that look good year round. Well, that's tough. I mean, especially when you go out of, the range of, okay, short, squat, evergreen conifer, because there is this whole section of time, winter, i.e. winter, that it's kind of hard. What do you call look good at that point? I like a seed head here and there, but maybe that's not Robin's cup of tea. But I'll offer a few things. What I did for this question is I went out, I plopped myself on my front steps, I looked up at my front yard garden, my front foundation planting, if you will, and I picked out my two favorites and then a list of some perennials that I thought were worthy too. So the first one I'm going to say is just a dwarf oak leaf hydrangea. All right. Oak leaf hydrangeas, which are Hydrangea quercifolia. The one I happened to pull out of the grab bag was the first one I saw in my front yard, and that's Gatsby Gal, which is the cultivar name is Bren Hill. It's zones 5 to 9. You can't go wrong with an oak leaf hydrangea, okay? It's a shrub that performs in every season, truly performs in every season. So, any of these dwarf oak leaf hydrangeas can be anywhere from 2 to 3 feet tall and wide to 4 to 5 feet tall and wide. And regular oak leaf hydrangea can go upwards 10 to 12 feet. So stick with the dwarf ones. I love this Gatsby Gal. It's got large, really cool oak leaf looking foliage that is huge leaves, the size of my head, that have these really cool rough texture to them, which is just divine. Then, around this time of year, so we're talking, early to midsummer, you get these large panicle blooms that are white. They can be upwards of 12 inches. So that's pretty impressive. Like 1/5 of the whole total size of this shrub is taken up by a flower. And it gets absolutely covered in flowers. Those panicles of flowers that go all the way through summer, the white flowers, eventually they fade, but they don't fade to brown. They fade to this gorgeous mauve, kind of a dark pink, rusty pink showing, which is just as beautiful in my opinion. And then, man, fall color, it's so much, it's better than an oak tree. It goes yellow, it goes orange, it goes bright red, then burgundy. And then the leaves drop off. And I know everybody talks about exfoliating bark. It's so cool. And a lot of people are like, ew, it doesn't look cool. This is cool exfoliating bark on this plant. It is cinnamon colored. It almost looks like cinnamon sticks are peeling left and right off of this plant. And it's super attractive in winter. So I think a dwarf oak leaf hydrangea should be in every front yard garden across America. They're just amazing. And let's keep in mind too that Hydrangea quercifolia is a native hydrangea as well. So my next one that just jumped out, and it's one that I've talked about on the podcast before, but it's Perry's Gold Norway Spruce. I think let's give a shout out to those dwarf conifers. I know they can be pricey. I know that they're an investment, but that is truly a 4-season plant that in a front garden, 1 or 2, really have a presence year round. So this is Picea aves, Perry's Gold. It's zones 3 to 9. So it covers a large swath of the North American continent. It's a dwarf conifer that I actually got from Caddy's Falls Nursery in Vermont, which I know is a favorite of yours as well, Carol, because it was up near where you used to live. I've had it for 10 plus years now. I looked back at my little journal and it's done well. It's only about right now in my garden, maybe 2.5 feet tall and wide, maybe three on a good day. It's got this squatty appearance, kind of a little bit of a pyramid shape, but these long kind of, well, as long as you can get with 2 feet tall and wide, this kind of arching branches kind of looks like a ballerina's tutu. You kind of get that layered effect to it. They're swooping, they're outstretched, but it's really in spring. This is a very dark green, luscious conifer, but in spring, it pushes new growth that is bright acid yellow. And I know a lot of conifers do that, right? They get this really colorful new growth, but Perry's Gold, so it started in spring. So it started March here. It is now, we are launching towards August and it is still yellow. It still has those yellow tips. They haven't burned out. They don't burn out in the summer. And for me, it won't actually start to fade until September or so, which is exactly when I want it to look like a little normal, quote unquote, Christmas tree. It's perfect. It puts on its green cape for the fall and winter months. So yeah, I just love it. It's in full sun. It tolerates poor, lean, well-drained soil. So I don't do anything to it. I've given it no exceptional care other than getting it established, which is important for these conifers in the beginning. And it's just a stunner. And then you guys know, I'm not as big into the perennials, but I'm going to throw out some perennials that I think are worthy. They're not necessarily all evergreen, but they're worthy for the front yard garden. And that would be epimediums, which are going to give you that evergreen presence, low growing, colonizing type of ground cover. I'll talk about them more in another question down the road here. Ito peonies, because I think that they're just well behaved. They don't need staking. They put on a bloom show like no other. And if you ever get deliveries from the Amazon man, he'll be obsessed with your Ito peonies because they're beautiful. And the last one I'm going to say is anything in the Amsonia, the Blue Star family. Just a gorgeous plant, actually gets some of the most magnificent fall color from a perennial that you can ask for, and really, really interesting seed pods in winter. So again, my roundup of perennials is epimediums, Ito peonies, and Amsonias. Okay, we've got Lynn here. And Lynn writes, this is a pretty long one, but I think it's important to read it all. All right, I need design ideas for my new home's sloped front yard. If we usually get the most letters about talk to me about shade gardening and talk to me about slopes. So here we go. The front yard, Lynn writes, is level on both sides of the sidewalk, about 3 feet on either side, and then has about a 15-foot steep incline before flattening out at the top where the house is. I'd like to plant something native on the slope to avoid the terrible acrobatics of lawn mowing the hill. I can relate. But I can't get the proportions of the design right. Should I plant the tall things by the sidewalk in the front where it's level in order to make the whole yard appear level? Or should I plant the tall shrubs in the back at the top of the hill? But wouldn't that exaggerate the slope? She writes, I love this too, people. I'm in zone 7B in full sun with clay soil. We got to know where you live in order to give recommendations. But, well, Kara, I feel a little out of my depth.
I'm not a designer. This sounds like a designer question to me.
Yeah, me too. So you know what? Let's get designer Jay Sifford in North Carolina on the phone and see if he's got some great ideas for Lynn.
That sounds like a good idea.
Hey, Jay, nice to see you. Thanks so much for helping us out with this question.
Hey, Dee, you are more than welcome. Happy Friday to you.
Hey, happy Friday to you too. I'm so excited because obviously Carol and I read this question from Lynn and we said, oh gosh, no, we are out of our depth with this one. But I thought about your upcoming article in Fine Gardening and how you moved into recently and created a garden in your front yard that is sloped. And I thought, oh gosh, this is almost too good to be true because here Lynn is with a sloped front yard. So, what were your initial thoughts about, answering her question and dilemma?
Sure. So to me, a sloped yard is a perfect um, place to install a beautiful tapestry garden because when I see a slope, I think of an easel, an artist's easel with a canvas on it, and you can just paint something beautiful on it. So a lot of people are a little bit afraid because you can have erosion problems and this and that, but it can really be the most spectacular garden if you know what you're doing and if you're not afraid to throw in a little sweat equity. So I actually read her question and she talked about, or she posed the question, should she plant really tall shrubs to kind of be level with the top part of her yard? And I would
Yes.
say definitely not, because
Okay.
that's going to give you an Adams Family vibe. Like, I don't want to go there because when you walk up the sidewalk, the steps on the sidewalk, you're going to feel really compressed and it's going to be dark and kind of uncomfortable. So what I would do is just to plant a lot of low things. And again, when you stand back from the street and you look at the yard, you'll notice a beautiful tapestry. So when I say tapestry, I'm thinking about shapes like a jigsaw puzzle or like a Ralph Lauren comforter or a paisley necktie, something like that, where the shapes actually interact with each other, but they're laid out in a way that really makes sense. Because I think if a garden doesn't read like it makes sense to your brain, you're not going to want to spend time there. You can go to somebody else's garden, and we want you to stay in your garden. So I think that's really important.
True. Very true.
So I think some really low things are going to be good because then you can kind of tweak it to where the shapes really make sense. They're not overlapping each other, they're not overpowering each other. It just can be a really nice thing. So, what I would do if she wants to use natives, which is what she said in her question, I would probably use some native grasses that don't get too tall, and purple love grass would be a really good selection for that, or some of the shorter panicums, the switchgrasses, like Cape Breeze is shorter. It only gets about 2 feet tall. I
Okay.
love Shenandoah, but it can get about 3.5 feet tall. So that might be a little too tall for what we're going to do. But again, lay things out in a pattern and
Mhm.
not just squares. We're not doing Mondrian here, but you could do paisleys, you can do oblong shapes, different things like that to really make these plants use a term from a home and garden network that I usually don't use. But I think also if she's got some strong people around or she has a strong back and isn't afraid to sweat, if she can mix some boulders in,
Mhm.
not huge boulders like Volkswagen size boulders, but what we call 2 or 3 man boulders. So that means something that 2 or 3 people can carry. So from basketball size to maybe 30, 32 inches wide, but sort of short. You want to stay short because you want to keep everything close to the ground because that's when you can really see the foliage texture and shapes really well. So mix some boulders in, that would be great. And especially if she had a stone house or some other stone accents, that would be perfect because I think it's so important to pull elements of the architecture out into the garden. And that's what
Okay.
gives you that homogeneous um, indoor outdoor feeling that people read as being really relaxing and tranquil.
And
So,
when you
mhm.
say boulders, are you looking to that as kind of being, natural elements and give you some textural shapes that are coming from non-plant material? In a regular garden, you might put a patio and other hardscaping. Are the boulders in this sloped garden kind of taking the place of that?
I think they are, but also it's going to give you some year-round structure because a
Okay.
lot of the native perennials and grasses that she kind of referenced, I think they're going to die down in the winter or they're going to turn
Gotcha.
brown. So if you have something with some structure, that's why I always like to incorporate shrubs into this type of garden because they're there long after the perennials kind of dry up and go to bed for the winter.
Gotcha, gotcha. Okay, good to know. All right, so some low growing grasses.
Right.
You mentioned panicums. You mentioned purple love grass, which is such a beauty as well. Get some boulders in there. Definitely don't plant all the tall stuff right next to the sidewalk because we don't want the Adams family. We don't want that aesthetic going on. So what else? What other offerings can you give
Okay.
her advice on?
I would do a wide variety of native perennials since she mentioned native was important to her. but don't plant 2 or 3. That's the worst thing you can do because it's going to look really hodgepodge. So plant in masses, because when you see a mass of 50 plants, if it's all the same plant, it's going to read in your brain as one entity, not 50 little entities. So it's going to really simplify everything. It's really important to make this type of a garden design simplistic. So I think some of the things she could use are some of the lower Rebeckias, the black-eyed Susans. Don't use Goldstrom because that thing gets fungal diseases like crazy. So Fulgida, variety Fulgida would be good, or American Gold Rush, which I think is the perennial of the year. That's a great one. That's what I have up in my mountain garden, and I've really liked it. Some of the echinaceas, there's one short one called Powwow Wildberry. That's beautiful pink, like most of them are, but it stays more compact, almost shrub-like. She could actually pepper in some Liatris spicata with her grasses, like I did in the mountain place. So that's just a really spiky purple flower. It's a native and it blooms for me in July. So it's kind of nice after the spring perennials kind of get a little bit worn out and you have something to kind of take over the pace. And it's a beautiful thing. It does seed freely. So that's when you may want a deadhead, although the birds and goldfinches in particular really like that. So that's
nice.
Amsonia, Blue Star would be really good. And there are varieties of that. Asters are one of my new favorite perennials because this time of year, they just make you happy with the blues and the purples and that sort of thing. It's just a beautiful thing to kind of cap off the warm weather seasons with. That's a great one. Coreopsis, I planted like 150. Again, why plant 3 when you could plant 150? And they stay kind of short. And the one I like is Zagreb because it has a beautiful fern-like foliage and it blooms yellow in the summer, early summer. But even when it's not in bloom, that foliage is it's beautiful. In the spring, it's almost like a Granny Smith apple green. So it's really a happy color in spring. Penstemon would be good. It's got some dark, sort of dramatic foliage. Most of them kind of have a reddish foliage. So that would be really good. So those would be some plants that are natives that she could work with. And then I would sort of interject some groupings of some shrubs that don't get too tall. Again, no Adam's family. But speaking of natives, the 9-barks, the Physocarpus would be really great. I love that. I think it's an underused shrub, and it is a native shrub to the East Coast. There's one I really like that stays shorter called Tiny Wine. It's a lot better than Little Devil. It's just a hardier thing. It's got a beautiful dark wine brownish kind of foliage. It looks really good with blues and with yellows and with pinks. Goes with pretty much anything. And then Weigela is another native shrub, and there's a really short one called Spilled Wine. Gets about 2 feet tall. So that would be a really great thing to use. So those would be some of the natives that I would use, but I also want to talk about some of the non-natives, because if you have an artistic mind like me, you kind of want to make it look really good, and you can slip in a few non-natives. And you know what? After a glass of wine, who's going to know the difference, right? So some of these I think would be really, really pretty mixed in. Allium, if you want, the big old purple alliums in the spring, you can plant the bulbs. For me, they're not really long-lived. But some of the perennial alliums like Summer Beauty and Millennium, they bloom with smaller bloom heads, but they bloom later. They bloom in the summer and they last a long time. So that's a really good thing to mix. And they make it 12 to 14 inches tall. So they kind of work with our low palette that we're talking about. That would be good. Some of the hardy geraniums, some of those are native, but Roseanne is the one that I love. It's a beautiful blue and it blooms for me from April to November. And if you can get that many months of flowering out of it, it's having in your garden. So that's a good one. Nepeta or catmint is great. The one I've been using is called Cat's Pajamas, and it's great. It blooms a long time, and it has a fragrance.
That's a compact one too, right?
It is.
That's not going to be a Walker's Low that's getting 3 feet tall by 3 feet wide.
Right. Although Walker's Low is a beautiful thing.
It is, but it's a monster.
It is. Yeah. Perovskia, Russian sage, is great mixed in, depending on which one you use. It can be 20 to 36 inches tall probably, but it would definitely fit. Dianthus, especially Fire Witch, is one of my go-to plants in my designs because it stays low, maybe 6 inches. It can bloom in my climate. I'm 8A, Lynn 7B, so almost the same thing. It can bloom 12 months a year if we have a fairly warm winter. It blooms most heavily in April, May, and early June, but it can bloom sporadically. And it smells like carnations, so that's not a bad thing either. And it's got a beautiful blue-gray foliage that looks good with just about any other color, except maybe orange, because the flowers are really a hot pink. Some of the salvias are great. Like Caradonna is very popular in England and is one of my favorites. Beautiful bluish purple spires for me, April and May. So that's a nice thing. And then after that, the catmint sort of takes over with a similar form, but with a lighter blue flower. Some of the verbenas are good. Homestead purple is one that I recommend sometimes. It's kind of a big box store kind of plant, actually. But it blooms purple, and it blooms from March to November. And I mean, you know,
Yeah,
how
let's
can you
not
argue?
diss it because it shows up at a box store. I mean, it might show up there just because it's tough as nails and it's just a performer, you know?
It is really a good plant. So, and then some of the lower shrubs are going to be good. I'm really into junipers. It's hard for me to talk my clients into junipers because they remember playing hide and seek under those big monsters. You know, we all hid under, and then you would itch for 3 days afterwards. But there's some kindler and gentler ones now. I really think in a garden like this, Juniper horizontalis, like the blue rug juniper, gets like 6, 8 inches tall, and it hugs the ground. It's got the beautiful blue-gray foliage that the fire witch dianthus has, and it spreads. It's easy. It's drought tolerant. It's hard to kill unless you let it sit in water. But she's on a slope, so I think she would be fine with that. Junipers conferta too, the Pacific, like the Golden Pacific or the Blue Pacific shore junipers. Those are great. I have a big old mass of the Golden Pacific up at the mountain garden, and I really enjoy that a lot. Strebe's Fineling cotoneaster is, I hate cotoneasters except for Strebe's Fineling because it gets like 6 inches tall. It's really evergreen for me, which some of them aren't. And it has white flowers in the spring. It has red berries in the winter. It's just a great thing, but it stays under a foot, usually older than that. So again, it's one of those ground cover type of hugging shrubs like the Juniper horizontalis. So it's a great thing. It does great on the slope, and it's really cool because it's like an octopus, and it kind of works its way around the boulders if she uses boulders. So the boulder just kind of has a nice bright green background. And so many of the plants that I'm talking about actually have a lot of color, whether it's foliage color or flower color. So I think that you need some dark green. Otherwise, your garden is green like Vegas gone bad. And I think, that's a little too much. So dark green just gives your eye a place to rest. And it's also a color that recedes. So if you have a small space, it can make the space feel larger if you use that in the background. So that would be good. And then hydrangeas, you know, everybody needs some hydrangeas. And they've thankfully kind of come back into popularity the last few years. And since she's in full sun, I think some of the shorter paniculatas would be good. Like Bobo would be good. Little lime would be good, although I think Bobo has stronger stems. Sometimes little lime can get a little floppy, but just get some of those around in groupings, and that will actually give your garden more of a third dimension, and it'll make it a lot more interesting. And again, those things bloom all summer into the early fall, and it's just a beautiful thing. So that's sort of what I came up with.
Oh my gosh, that's a gorgeous.
Grasses actually, I think, because everybody needs grasses. You know, Carly Rose Pennisetum is one of my favorites. I've planted a whole bunch of those in my mountain garden. And Cassian is nice. It stays a little shorter. I think Carly Rose, it's a different species, so it's a little bit hardier and has those beautiful light pink flower heads / seed heads in the early summer. It's a really nice thing. It doesn't get too tall. Like some grasses, you know, the miscanthus, they can get really, really tall, and it's not going to work in this kind of garden. And if she's not a lazy gardener, for slope, I would recommend blue dune limegrass. It's European, but it has a beautiful powder blue color. And sometimes in a warmer winter, it can actually hold that color. Yeah. And if it does get cold, it'll turn tan, but then as soon as it warms back up, it'll come back. It stays kind of low, maybe 12 to 16 inches, but it does spread by rhizomes, unlike a lot of these clumping grasses. So you kind of have to chip it out eventually if it grows where you don't want it to. But because it's a dune grass and it spreads by rhizomes, it's really great to hold the slope, you know, to protect against erosion. Nice. So those would be the two grasses I probably would recommend. for her
So
situation.
I have just an overall, I mean, that the plant list is amazing. And you said, as far as groupings and laying things out, don't plant in threes and fives, plant in nines and 15s and larger groupings of plants. Do you start with your woody plant material, Jay? Do you start with the shrubbery, or do you just start kind of laying out the shapes within the perennial matrix of what you want first, and then dot in those shrubs in threes and fives afterwards?
I lay out the perennials and the grasses first. Usually
Okay.
grasses actually. And if she wants to take a can of white marking paint and just draw a bunch of paisleys and ovals and things on her hillside, that would be a good way to start. If she has grass on her hillside currently, she probably doesn't want to till it up. Tilling's got kind of a bad rep anyway, but because it disturbs the soil stratification. But she can actually just kill her grass and plant right in that grass, and
Mhm.
that's going to hold the hillside against erosion until her other plants take hold. And she also probably would want to plant fairly close together,
Okay.
because when you plant close together, it really outcompetes the weeds
Mhm.
for sunlight and rain and that sort of thing. So she'll probably have a lot less weed issue after her plants are established a little bit. And I would probably mulch it once. I like double hammered hardwood mulch for many reasons. When it breaks down, it also really enriches the soil.
Mhm.
So use that maybe just to start with. And by the time that decays, then probably her other perennials and things that she's planted will fill in, and she probably won't need to do that anymore, because mulching on a slope is not for the faint of heart. You kind of have sort of a mountain goat mentality to do that. Sometimes you slide down, but you pick yourself up and crawl back up, and then all is good.
Well, if any of our listeners want to see a gorgeous sloped front yard, please be sure to pick up an issue of Fine Gardening, issue 209. It will be out the first week of December. It will also be available online. And Lynn, you will actually get to see a schematic planting plan of Jay's front sloped garden, because that will be the issue that we feature. Jay Siffer, designer extraordinaire from North Carolina, will get to see this mountain garden that he's created. And I will say, Jay, it's only 3 years old, 4 years old.
3 years old. The front is
Wow. So Lynn, if you follow his advice, I can guarantee you are going to have one of the most spectacular gardens, because I got to visit Jay's garden this past year and I can't believe it's 3 years old. It looks like it is a 10-year-old garden. It's absolutely gorgeous. And Jay, thank you so much for answering this question. Carol and I would have done a horrible job in comparison to what you just did.
Thank you, Dee. Always a pleasure.
Thank you. I knew Jay Sifford would be the person to ask about this, because we're going to be featuring an article of his coming up in our issue 209, and he almost had that exact same scenario as Lynn, a sloped front yard that he did. He just worked magic with. It's gorgeous.
I'm always impressed by what a good designer can come up with for, a solution for something a problem that a lot of people may have.
It's so true. It's so true.
Okay, I think this one's pretty easy one.
Okay.
At G Nelms asked, when you deadhead flowers, should you replant the seeds or preserve them? And I think of deadheading and seed harvesting as two separate operations, and I'll explain why. So I think of deadheading as removing a flower as soon as it finishes blooming, but before it starts to develop seeds. And we do this for aesthetic reasons, because you don't want, the plant immediately looks better as soon as you cut those dead flowers off, but also for performance reasons, because in many cases, removing that spent flower before it puts energy into seeds is going to redirect energy into remaining buds that will then produce flowers more quickly than they would if it was trying to make seeds, which is quite energy intensive. So if my plan is to harvest viable seed, I'm going to leave those flowers on until they contain ripe seeds. And that is, it's not going to look as good, honestly, as if I was doing true deadheading. But each plant is different. I would say if you're deadhead. If you are saving seeds, I would deadhead for a while, for the first part of the season. And this sort of naturally happens, as the season progresses and we get busy or we're inside or we're traveling or whatever. Some things just naturally go to seed, and those ones you can go out and collect. And depending on how it disperses the seed, the plant disperses the seed, you may need to hang them upside down over a paper bag or something like that to collect the seed, because most of the seed heads have a natural way of dispersing them, and they will totally do that as soon as the seed is
Whether
right.
you're ready for it or not, in your basement, exploding seed pods all over the place.
Exactly. But if you just keep an eye on it, that's a great way to get seeds for the next year. And if you're okay with random seedlings in sort of the same area that you had this growing in the current season, if you're okay with them coming back next year, by all means let them just go to seed and do their own thing naturally. And you'll I love surprises, so that's sometimes fun. But Keelan DeWitt, our friend and author out in Montana, also has a method where she'll go through and cut down the tops of things as they've finished, and some of them have active seed heads and some of them don't. She just throws them into this area that's behind the shed, and in a few years she has new seedlings that have naturally generated back there, digs them up, puts them back into the garden. So that's something that you can do. It's a little less fuss and muss than, tenderly gathering each little seed head and separating the chaff from the seed. But I'd say deadheading and seed harvesting can be the same thing, but just think of what it is your goal is before doing one of these two things.
I like it. Yeah. I mean, I think I naturally do that by accident. I would just throwing stuff into the compost pile at the end. I'm like, oh gosh, look at all those little verbena seedlings. Hooray. Transplant. All right. Onward. I have a question from Erin Mickey. What do I plant under a huge maple tree? The roots, with a crying, angry emoji face. So clearly Erin is up against it right now. All right, I'm going to circle back to a couple questions before. My go-to is epimediums. I live in a very wooded area. My gardens all kind of go right up to the wooded edge. I have a lot of mature hemlock trees and mature maples and mature oaks. So I'm constantly trying to figure out what survives in that very, very root-bound, dry shade environment. And epimediums, which are sometimes called barren worts, are my go-to plant. So there are zones 4 to 9. I've seen a few different species that say to zone 3. So Erin, I don't know where you are, but there is still hope if you're in a colder zone. They have stiff foliage, which is either heart-shaped or lance-shaped leaves. Certain varieties even have kind of yellow teeth all around the outside of the leaves that makes them look otherworldly or maybe a little deadly. They are not appetizing to deer and or bunnies, and that is just or rodents of any kind because of that stiff kind of indigestion-inducing foliage, I believe. In late winter to early spring, all these little wires kind of float above the foliage and get covered with these clouds of star-like flowers. They're absolutely beautiful. The colors, any color you can think of, white, pink, red, yellow, everything, purple, any color you like, epimediums come in that flavor. I like the cultivar stoplights a lot. I'm not a big red fan. I don't have a lot of red in my garden, but because epimediums flower so early, sometimes with my primroses and epimediums, I'm like, let's push the envelope. Let me get a little orange and red into the mix. And stoplights I'm going to put a picture of it up on our show notes at finegardening.com. It is a red, yellow bicolor epimedium. So it literally does look like a stoplight with the green foliage. Get it? And it's really, really cool. I love it. It's just beautiful. All right. this is going to be a shocker for longtime listeners, but the second plant I'm going to recommend for underneath a huge mature maple tree is hellebores. I have a love-hate relationship with hellebores. Um, I think classically, I thought that they were kind of overrated because they're zones 4 to 9 and they bloom in winter. Regardless of where you are, they bloom in winter. And I live in New England, and these plants, for historically, for many of the older cultivars, their blossoms were hidden underneath the foliage and face down. There is no way when it is 0 degrees outside that I'm going to lay on my belly so I can look to see if my hellebores are blooming. Like, that is not going to happen. But plant breeders, they are a smart bunch. And over probably the last couple of decades, they have started to breed these hellebores that have outward facing blooms that do hover above the foliage. And they're truly, truly stunning. I mean, there are some cultivars that are just chef's kiss. Mwah. Wonderful. My favorite is Spanish Flare, which is a very light pale yellow, again, early in the season, and it has a red center to it or a burgundy center to it. So absolutely beautiful. That individual flower on the hellebore is 3 inches across. I mean, they're big. We're not talking about wussy flowers here. But hellebores are dry shade loving. They have these huge kind of lovely palmate green leaves that are just attractive, evergreen year round. You do have to do some cleanup, much like the epimediums, after they flower, after they push new growth. The old growth is kind of these bedraggled leaves that you have to go around and kind of trim up a little bit. That's really the only maintenance they need, though. They don't need consistent water. They don't need constant fertilization. They don't need good soils. They thrive in root bound competition areas. So I would say between the both of those, and if you planted epimediums with hellebores, threw in a couple painted ferns, because those do well too, ethereums, you have yourself a garden right underneath that maple tree, and you'll be sending us happy face emojis instead of cryy face emojis. Good luck, Aaron. Yeah, you got more in the mailbag there, Carol?
We coming down to the bottom of the mailbag, but here we have
Okay.
another practical question. What is your number one tip to reduce garden maintenance?
Okay.
And I think we might both agree on this one, that mulch, judiciously applied, will save you so much time. Keeps the plants hydrate. They don't lose as much water. It keeps down the weeds. And wherever you don't have mulch, plants and more plants. You do not want acres of mulch. I mean, that's low maintenance, but get some more plants in there. And ground covers are a great living mulch, and really just add a lot of wildlife value to your property because of all the root systems, and they're, it's just more plants. More plants is better.
Oh,
I'd say.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I will say that, don't scrimp on your mulch. Okay. So when you've committed to mulching, do a thorough and good weeding, do it. Just do it. And then lay down at least 3 inches of a mulch. Okay. I know it's a bummer. Take it from somebody who, at one point in time had 20 yards of bulk mulch sitting in her driveway. It is, it's very labor intensive, but if you can commit to laying down that initial 3-inch layer of mulch, chances are you're not going to have to do that every single year. 2 years later, you might then have to, add another inch or so. 2 years after that, maybe a couple more inches. It feeds the soil too. It breaks down and feeds the soil. So then you're going to stop fertilizing so much. And also, it holds in the moisture, the ground moisture. So you're going to water less. So, mulch is the answer.
Yes, I agree. And also, do not be afraid to mulch with compost. Like, that's in my in-between years when I'm not doing the bark mulch, I will put some compost around the crowns of the plants. Works just as well to keep down the weeds.
and the plants really love it. And like you said, it feeds the soil. And so within a few years, you've got a lovely, lovely thick layer of that dark composted soil in the top layer.
Absolutely. That's a great, yes. I love that tip. I wish that I did that like earlier on in my gardening career. I wish that I did that, but yes, I love that. Add compost in those in between years. You don't have to do 20 yards of mulch every single year.
Right.
Get a good layer first.
Yeah. And you do not need to mix compost into the soil. It will get in there. The animals and little underground creatures will get it right where it needs to go.
Well, Carol, that was super fun. I think we did a good job. We should continue on and get another listener Q&A up on the books coming up.
We absolutely should. I forgot how much fun they are, but going back and listening to them again, it's almost like new again, right?
It totally is. It totally is. Well, guys, we hope that some of these questions are applicable to your gardening situation. And if not, feel free. It's the FG@Taunton, TAUNTON.com email address. Send us your questions, or, you can always hit us up on our social media channels too. Send questions, and we'll see you next time.